Dr. K. S. Ramakrishnan is working as an assistant professor, School of Education, Tamil Nadu Open University, Chennai 15. He has been teaching science education, environmental science, educational technology, and research methodology in various colleges of education and Tamil Nadu Open University for the past 9 years. He has guided so many M.Ed, M.Phil, and PhD students. His current research areas are environmental education, educational technology, and media and communication. He has conducted various workshops on ICT usage in education, Wiki Educator, e-content development, and education research methodology. He had attended many online workshops on Moodle, learning analytics. He has published 6 books and many articles in national and international journals of repute. He regularly gives plenary and keynote speeches on environment and ICT related issues at various national and international conferences. He has delivered 28 episodes of the program Pudiyodor Ulagam at All India Radio, Chennai, related to various new developments in science and technology.
Welcome to UGC CEC program on environmental science. In this episode, we shall discuss about the application of remote sensing in wetland mapping and habitat analysis. So, the contents are as follows: the remote sensing, the application of remote sensing in wetland mapping, the remote sensing for habitat analysis, and the influence of ecosystem on the habitat. So, these are all the points we are going to discuss. In the previous episode already we had discussed about the remote sensing, and now let us see the definition what it is. The remote sensing technology captures the radiation in different wavelengths reflected, emitted by the Earth's surface features and record it either directly on the film, as in the case of aerial photography, or in digital medium used for generating the images. See, you look at the definition. It captures the radiation in different wavelength. Why different wavelength? Because the electromagnetic spectrum is ranging from infrared, ultraviolet, optical, radio, TV, microwave, like that it is a spectrum, and so it consists of various frequencies and they have different properties also. So, depending upon our purpose, we have to use the corresponding frequency. And so, when the electromagnetic radiation is falling on some object, it is diffused or reflected or refracted also. So, it is capturing the images, it is capturing the radiation reflected by various objects, and depending upon the objects, the intensity, the frequency and the other particulars may change, and accordingly the imaging also will differ. And so, it is called the remote sensing. Simply speaking, remote sensing means sensing from a remote place. Now, the significance or uses of wetland, why we are particularly concentrating on the wetland ecosystem, that is one of the most important ecosystems of the environment. It is called the kidney, because actually it is a cleaning agent. It is neither the marine ecosystem nor the land ecosystem, it is in between, and it is doing a lot of functions, and therefore, it is one of the most important ecosystem in the earth. And what are the functions that it is doing? It filters the water, and it is supporting a diversity of vegetation, and it is consisting of a large number of wildlife habitat, and the major components hydrology, soil and vegetation, and therefore, it is an interface or it is the intermediate between the water ecosystem and the land ecosystem. And so, it is one of the most important ecosystem, and it is one of the most neglected ecosystem also, and therefore, we have to map wetland ecosystem. And now, and it is mobilizing the heavy metals, it regulates the flow of water and nutrients and the reduction of prevention of erosion. Actually, the background picture also, that is the wetland ecosystem only. So, you can understand what an important function that the wetland ecosystem is performing. And what are the parameters? The water storage capability. So, the wetland ecosystem consists of so many parameters or the characteristic, and the major characteristic of the water storage capability, it depends upon the size, extent of water spread. So, you look at the diagram, it is the size of the wetland and it is spreading to a large area also. And the seasonal variation, because water is not permanently stored over here, depending upon the season, in rainy season more water or vice versa, and the water flow, the flow channels, because mostly it is connected to the some river or some seashore, and therefore, the water flow, the vegetation, the abundance, richness, and the weed infestation. Actually, it is mostly attached with the weed infestation. So, these are all the parameters that we have to observe. And so, in remote sensing, what we are concentrating, these are all the parameters that we are concentrating on the remote sensing, and these are all the particulars that we are mapping: the water quality, the turbidity, because here the water is stale, it is not moving here and there, and so always the algae or the fungus or weed. So, because of their activity, a lot of turbidity is also there. And the eutrophication means when a large number of nutrients are deposited over the water ecosystem, then what will happen? It is depleting all the oxygen content, and the plants or animals, they are devoid of oxygen and they will die, and because of that the eutrophication, the algae growth will be more, and that is deposited on the surface, and so the water cannot go inside. That is the reason for the turbidity. And so, the eutrophication, the siltation or sediment concentration, because most of the wetland ecosystem that is connected with some nearby houses or the industries. So, from there the nutrients or the water, it is deposited on the wetland, and so gradually all the pollutants and they are deposited over there, sedimentation, and the chlorophyll concentration, the algal biological parameters, the herbicides in short lived taxa, taxa means the organism, and the herbicide in short lived, certain organism they are short living, for example some small fishes, and the bioaccumulation of metals in long lived, because most of this ecosystem are connected with the nearby factories and all, and therefore, the lead, arsenic, copper, nickel, all these are taken by the plants, and from the plants they are transferred into the animals, and from small animals transferred into the big animal, and that is called the bioaccumulation, and we have to analyze the bioaccumulation concentration also. And so, when we are imaging the wetland ecosystem, these are all the parameters that we have to observe. Now, the type of remote sensing, already we had discussed passive, the sunlight, and active, radar, lidar, etc. So, the active means they are emitting the electromagnetic wave and they receive. Passive, somewhere else the electromagnetic radiation is falling and simply that it is imaging. So, the active and passive both are possible, and now the remote sensors used, there are so much technologies available, the Landsat, the SPOT, the RadarSat, the SAR, synthetic aperture radar, and Spectron, all these are different kinds of satellites available for remote sensing, and the aerial photography, the ground level, low level photography also. Photography is also one kind of the remote sensing. And now, let us see the images. It is taken from the Landsat, and the high spatial resolution 16-day interval, that means it is a temporal resolution, and 25 years archive, that means for the past 25 years it has taken similar photographs, and 95% accuracy in mapping compared to the manual mapping. So, in manual mapping, whatever accuracy we are getting, it is 95% more of that manual mapping, and the bands. So, 4, 5, 7. So, these are all the bands in the satellite and they are best for detecting water. So, you look at the diagram, so it is the satellite image. Now, what are the other parameters? The thematic mapper, 30-meter spatial resolution, the infrared wavelength show water body better than the visible spectrum. So, here wherever the red color is there, they are the infrared spectrum, and strong absorption of light by water giving a low spectral response, and it is able to detect the open water also. So, these are all the places where open water is available. And now, some other parameter, it is able to classify vegetation. Here some green color is there, they are the vegetation, and the dense green, sparse green and very sparse green. So, it is able to differentiate the different types of vegetation also. And what are the problems associated? Somewhat cloud or shadow. So, here some cloud or shadow is there, and the dense vegetation makes it difficult to define soil or water boundaries, and it can classify the vegetation based on density. So, now my dear friends, how accurate that it is giving all the information, even the water land interface also it is able to define, and it is giving all the particulars. So, we have to interpret what does it mean. And now, the low level photography. So, it is a low level photography, and therefore, there is not much difference between the photography and the spectrum, both are more or less similar, and here it is giving the real image and that is giving the radio image. So, that is the only difference, and we can compare, and here it can detect the changes in vegetation distribution or the loss of wildlife also. And this is the advantages of the remote sensing, and here that we are using the remote sensing for the wetland mapping. So, that is one of the uses. And now, the second application, the habitat analysis. Habitat means the living place of the animals or the even the plants also, and habitat is where the animals are habiting. And here how can we use the remote sensing for the habitat analysis? And here there is a forest and here the animals, and now we have to map the forest with that animals. So, to what extent that the animals are habiting in the forest, for that we have to use the remote sensing. See how we are collecting the spatial data, and you look at the animal. So, it is a buffalo. So, the radio collars, so here they are connected with the collar, and it is something like the tie, and here as the mic is connected with me, in the same way the radio sensors they are connected with the collar. So, it is a radio collar, and here these are all the sensor. So, it is remote sensing. Actually, it is sending the radio wave and it is reflected by the sensors over here, and it is coming back, and depending upon the intensity and the frequency of the incoming and the received wave, the distance and the velocity and other particulars can be calculated or manipulated. And so, this is an example for the collecting the spatial data, and spatial data can be collected by other means also: direct observation, paper maps, the museum records. So, by all the ways that we can collect the spatial data, and the GPS, the geopositioning system, the collars or patches that upload, the handheld records of indicators, scat, tracks. So, all these are various methods for collecting the information, and as such the satellite imagery, the vegetation, land cover, the aerial photography and radar. So, all these are various forms of collecting the data. Now, let us have a short break. Welcome back. Let us continue. See, look at the diagram. We are collecting spatial data from various means, And now we have to use the remote sensing, and how we are using the spatial data. First we have to find the home range and the habitat selection and the biogeography questions. And first we have to find what is the home range of these animals, because these animals are wandering here and there, and we have to fix them where they are habiting. So, that is a major question. And see, there are various methods for finding the home range method. One method is the minimum convex polygon method. So, here wherever the points are available, there the buffaloes they are wandering, and therefore, we have to join the outermost point. So, it is the map, and we are joining all the outermost map, and we are connecting all them, and that area will be called the habitat of that particular animal, and we have to find the overall area. So, the area covered by this polygon, it is useful for conservation and reserve, and we have to use just 95% of points to define error, because there may be some error, and therefore, plus or minus 95% that we have to accept, and we are assuming that the animals are using the whole area equally. So, here we are assuming, because in the middle the animals are not there, but anyhow we are assuming that the animals are wandering throughout the area, but actually it is not true all the time, because particularly some animals like lion or some other animals, they are particularly wandering in a particular area only. Even though the lions are wandering throughout the forest, all the lions are not wandering all the areas of the forest, and therefore, it is an assumption that the lions are wandering or the animals are wandering throughout that area, and therefore, in this method, the minimum convex polygon method, we are finding the home range. And there are other methods are also possible. The kernel method. In the kernel method, you see, wherever the density is more, there the light intensity, that is somewhat bright, and where it is somewhat sparse, the intensity is gradually decreasing. And another method, the harmonic mean method. So, all these are different methods for finding the habitat. So, here also you see the density is more, and therefore, it is dark red, and the intensity of the color, that is gradually decreasing. So, anyhow we are using different method for finding the habitat. And now, then what we are doing? So, we are mapping the forest on the habitat. So, here it is the map of the forest reserve, and here it is the habitat of that particular animal, and therefore, both the layers that we are mapping. And in the previous episode we have seen there are so many layers, the geographic layer and different layers. So, now the geographic layer is attached with the habitat layer, and the next diagram that is telling that, and therefore, it is the geographic layer, it is the habitat layer. So, both are connected, and therefore, what conclusion that we have come? The buffalo herd 4085 locations in 2000, and therefore, there are 4085 locations the buffaloes are available, and that is called the habitat of that particular animal. And now, what more information that we are collecting, and the habitat selection method, the points on a map. So, the points are associated with the location specific data. Now, another layer that we are adding, because we are defining the habitat, and therefore, what are the vegetation, the temperature parameter, and so on and so forth, all that we are adding, the vegetation type, the distance from water, slope, elevation, aspect, soil type, and all that we are adding layer to layer, and finally, that we are arriving at some conclusion about what is the habitat. And now, we can do any type of statistical calculation, and now let us discuss one or two statistical analysis. And you look at the diagram, it is a forest, and see, these are all the three areas that we are discussing about. And now, we can do the statistical analysis, and here you look at the graph, the maroon color, the proportion of area, the green color the proportion of observation, and therefore, the proportion of area and the proportion of observation. So, what is the meaning of this graph? In this area is more, the habitation is less, and in some places the area is less, the habitation is more. That means, the buffaloes are liking these places rather than these places. So, here the area is more, but there is no buffalo, and here even though the area is less, the buffaloes are more habitating, and therefore, by drawing such graphs we can understand the behavior of that buffalo. So, the forest ecosystem, the habitat, that is classified into 8, and therefore, out of this 8 habitat, where the buffaloes are living more or less. So, that information that we can get. And another information. So, here kilometer from water. So, from water what distance that they are keeping, that information also that we can get. So, anyhow that we can get umpteen number of information or analysis, and therefore, that is the major advantage of the remote sensing. Now, let us see one or two more example. The habitat preferences. So, what are the preferences of the animals? So, here some animals are there, and now let us take an example, and particularly one animal. So, here we are able to prove some hypothesis also. So, the hypothesis says this animal ocelots, they prefer large patches of closed canopy. Canopy means the outer shade of the trees and all, the outermost coverage of the tree. And so, what hypothesis that we are telling? They prefer the large patches of closed canopy and avoid large patches of unsuitable habitat. So, we are hypothesizing that these particular animals are preferring certain type of habitat and they are avoiding other type of habitat. That is the hypothesis. And now, what is the location? Certain location, some national wildlife refuge that we are taking, and now how to prove or disprove the hypothesis. So, it is exactly like research. So, we are taking a hypothesis and we have to prove or disprove. Now, what method or experiment or what method that we are using, and here that we are taking the Landsat thematic mapper image. So, that we are taking, it is another image, and the aerial photograph and the digital orthophoto quadrangles also that we are taking. And now, what we are observing, and we are using the supervised and unsupervised classification for better accuracy, and we are dividing the land into 4 categories: the urban or barren, water, closed canopy and open canopy, and therefore, these are the 4 type of area that we are classifying, and exactly we have to match the habitat of the animal with the area, and if the animal are more possible or more seen in a particular habitat, then we can prove, or otherwise we have to disprove. And now, let us see the method, all these that we are taking. These are all the various parameters, and now what is the result? So, here you look at the diagram, and here there are certain patches where more number of animals are seen and vice versa, here the less number of animals, and therefore, here it is taken from the Google Earth only. And what conclusion that we are coming to? The closed canopy shows a great degree of fragmentation. So, these are all the closed canopy. The ocelots used the largest patches available. That means, in this area only the ocelots are living, and decisions must consider the size, shape and edge, and consider conserving areas with smaller patches. And therefore, what conclusion we are arriving at? We have to look after this area also. Otherwise, what will happen? Ocelot will not live there for a long time, it will run somewhere else. So, we have proved that particular hypothesis. And one more small example let us take, the squirrel. So, the squirrel population, what is the question? Which characteristic best predicts the squirrel density and recruitment? So, here it is a question. So, where the squirrels are living, and where they are not living, and the location, some forest or some ecosystem that we are taking, and here we are again mapping, and here the data from forest ecosystem restoration analysis and the ground measurement and the same thing. So, the methods are more or less same, and we are asking different questions and different answers that we are getting, and therefore, what is the result? The squirrel density best predicted by the basal area and the recruitment best predicted by the canopy cover. So, wherever the canopy means the outer cover of the trees and all. So, wherever the canopy cover is more, there the squirrels are living, and remove smaller trees, because the smaller trees and all actually they are the hindrance for the squirrel, and leave larger patches with moderate to high canopy cover. So, my dear friends, again that we are getting the same conclusion. That means, every animal they are habiting at some particular places and they are avoiding certain other particular places, and how we are arriving at these results through the satellite images and all, and therefore, the remote sensing is having tremendous number of applications. And now, let us summarize. In this episode, we have dealt with the definition of remote sensing, its applications in wetland mapping, habitat analysis, habitat selection, all this we have discussed, and we have dealt with some examples of testing the hypothesis with regard to the habitat of animals. So, all that we have discussed in this episode. Now, let us have some questions. The first question: mention the significant characteristics of wetlands. The second: mention few remote sensors used. The third one: mention the methods for collecting spatial data for habitat analysis. The fourth one: how home range of a species is calculated by minimum convex polygon method. The fifth one: mention some methods for finding the home range of a species. And the last question: mention the characteristics of the images obtained from Landsat. So, with that we are concluding this episode. Thank you.